This lecture has been made available to you courtesy of the American Numismatic Society.
I'd like to welcome everybody to our 233rd long table. We've been at this for quite a while, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, who I'm sure is known to all of you, Dr. Nathan Elkins, who is our Deputy Director. He is widely published on Greek and, on Roman coinage. He's going to be speaking today on Greek and Roman coinage, but he has published mostly on Roman coinage and a variety of other topics, focusing at times on iconography and imagery on coins. And in fact, today, he's going to be speaking to us on sport and spectacle on Greek and Roman coinage. So with that, Nathan, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Peter. So what I'm going to do for you today, I don't have a PowerPoint or anything. I've just pulled a lot of stuff from our collection to show you on this general theme of Greek and Roman sport and spectacle, representations of sport and spectacle on Greek and Roman coins. So I have no grand thesis or anything. I think it's just interesting to look and talk about how sport and spectacle are referred to and portrayed on these Greek and Roman coins, and we can talk about some specific examples and some curiosities about those. Unlike certain other iconographic themes on Greek and Roman coinage, this particular topic has not received sustained attention for the most part. There's an individual articles on certain kinds of types or representations out there, but there's really kind of no survey of sport and spectacle on Greek and Roman coins the way there is like buildings on Roman coins or something like that. But I did want to highlight a few sources for you before we get going. If you're interested in the overall theme, if sport and spectacle is something that appears to you, there is this exhibition, small little exhibition pamphlet really, from the 1980s in Tübingen. It's in German, Olympische Wettkampf, which deals with representations of Olympics and other games on coins based on an exhibition they had there in 1983 or 1984 on the subject. And then there's also yet another German exhibition catalog, this one from 1996, Sportspiele and Sieg, so sport, games and war is how that translates. And then more recently, from 2021, the Oxford Handbook of Sport and Spectacle in the Ancient World has one chapter in there on coin representations that I wrote, which surveyed the different functions and uses of certain images on Greek and Roman coins as they pertain to sport and spectacle. But beyond those kinds of surveys, as I say, it's really kind of individual type studies. I'll also point out that, since there are many different directions we could go with a topic like this, and since I wanted to show you actual objects as opposed to putting a PowerPoint together and all of that, I'm only choosing objects that are available in the ANS collection. There's some interesting things I'd like to show you that we don't have at the ANS. And I might mention those in passing here or there. So we're constrained by that. And also, of course, to a degree, in my interests, I think I'm probably focusing a bit more on Roman because that's where my main interest is. But I think you can objectively say there are more references to sport and spectacle on Roman coins than there are on the Greek coins, probably. If we can activate the object camera, I'll show you our first object here. So you may immediately recognize this as a silver coin from the city-state of Elis with the head of Zeus on the obverse. And then on the reverse, we have an eagle, which is the attribute of Zeus. And Elis is important because this was the city-state that dominated the Panhellenic sanctuary at Olympia for most of its ancient history. Sometimes it changed hands with other city-states, but for the most part, Elis was the political entity in control of the sanctuary and therefore the Olympic Games. And while they did not strike any coins that really depicted any of the Olympic Games or anything there, of course, the almost exclusive focus on Zeus refers to the important cult activity there. And this is one point I want to make about ancient games, is that they're always religious in nature. The idea of competitive sport just for sport's sake or for entertainment is a relatively modern thinking, relatively modern idea. In the ancient world, you would go to amphitheater games or perform in the Olympics, not just to compete, but also to honor the god. There was always a religious impetus behind this. And you really see that in coins like this, which don't feature the games per se, but focus on what is honored by the games and the sanctuary, which is the god. There is one early stater from Elis, which we don't have at the ANS. Must be a very rare type. That on the reverse has the old cult statue of Zeus, the one before Phidias's cult statue. And it has in Greek the legend Olympikon, which is the genitive plural for the games. And so that's really the only explicit reference to the games you have on the coins at Olympia. If we look elsewhere in the Greek world, up to the plains of Thessaly and the city of Larissa, you do also see, really, maybe for the first time, or at least one of the earliest representations, some of these overt references to different kinds of sports, competitive sports that take place. So Thessaly were the northern plains of Greece, and it was well known for its horses and very famous. It was an agricultural area. And so what featured on many of their coins were local sports associated with local festivals, which dealt with horses and bulls. So this one, you see someone running beside a horse, and presumably this depicts some kind of horse mounting competition where you would run alongside a galloping horse and then try to jump onto its back. Similarly, well, maybe not quite so similarly, but in the same vein of sport with animals, also from Larissa, you have these coins which show a bull and a man grappling the bull by the horns. And so this has been described as bull wrestling and things like that. I'm not quite sure it's bull wrestling, but you know, bull sports have a long history all the way back to the Minoan Bronze Age, many thousands of years before this. So it may have been some kind of bull mounting competition or something like that. But again, another local sport involving animals in Thessaly. And just to give you a preview of something that'll be out in the next ANS magazine, I think this arrived at the mailing house early this week, so maybe members will start getting their issues of the magazine this next week. But Helena Kagan has written an article about these silver fractions from Thessaly, which show not the more masculine sports involving the animals and the horse mounting competitions and all the rest, but you have women with balls, playing with balls, things that resemble basketballs. So, for example, you have something like this, or this. It looks like this woman is dribbling. See if I can zoom in on that a little bit more. Yeah, so these very tiny fractions, they haven't been widely studied and published, but she writes on these, and I'm not going to kind of give it away or anything what this is, leave you something to look forward to, but this jives with other representations we see in Greek and Roman antiquity on mosaics, for example, is that ball sports are something that is associated with feminine activity. Men do not engage in these kinds of sports. It's not a masculine kind of sport, which is, of course, completely the opposite now, in the sense that all competitive sports involve a ball of some type, whether that be basketball, football, soccer, so on and so forth. I'll show you another coin here again from the Greek world. This is a tetradrachm from Kos. Let me zoom out a little bit. Another early example. And this coin represents a discus thrower, a discobolus. And I know it's not the best example, but hopefully you can see the discobolus turning around and bending here and holding the discus in his hand. And behind him, you see a tripod. And we know that this design relates to the festival of Apollo at Tropion, and presumably the renown and successes of the discus throwers from the island of Kos. In this particular festival, only Kos, Knidos, Ialisos, Lindos, and Camaros could participate. And we know from Herodotus that victors in these particular games were awarded these bronze tripods that were then subsequently dedicated in the temple of Apollo. And so that allows us to interpret these. And we know that Kos often won in the discus, so you have that kind of civic pride coming through in these designs. Moving towards the west, in Sicily, the tyrant Galon celebrated his own victories in the chariot races at Olympia, depicting a victorious charioteer riding and driving a chariot with a victory flying in and crowning him. And then these later examples like this one take the victory out and instead have this column in the background, which represents a turning post, like a turning post you would have on a racetrack for chariots. This is, of course, not a representation of Galon himself, because the tyrant did not actually go and participate personally in the chariot races, but wealthy people and heads of states very often sponsored the chariot teams, and those victories were then ascribed to those people. So, not dissimilar to the way a baseball team might be sponsored, or a NASCAR driver or something like that by some other entity. Similarly, you have these very well-known staters of King Philip of Macedon, which show a charioteer driving a chariot with two horses. And this is the Sonorus, a two-horse chariot that participated in Olympic competitions. And we know that King Philip sponsored games here and sponsored chariots. And so this celebrates King Philip's victory. And you see his name in Greek below Philippou, the victory of Philip. And also on some of his tetradrachms, you see a man riding a horse carrying a palm branch, which is the symbol of victory. Victors in sporting competitions were very often awarded palm branches as a symbol of victory. And so this horse race was called the Cales, and you can see the same thing here with Philip's name, Philippou, marking Philip's victory in this horse race. So let me check my notes here. So I want to move to the city-state of Aspendos in Pamphylia. Some early silver coins there perhaps illustrate the connection between warfare and games. You may notice that a lot of ancient games, Greek games in particular, seem to have some connection with practicalities in warfare or could be related to military training. And many scholars see the origins of games in the Greek world as related to military training. And so here you see a semi-nude hoplite, a warrior with the shield and a sword and wearing a helmet. This could be an idealized representation of a warrior, or it could also be one of these running and armor kinds of competitions that many ancient Greek festivals included. We do know that other examples of coins from Aspendos more overtly refer to games, and many of you will probably have seen these before. These staters from Aspendos, which show two wrestlers grappling together. And then on the other side, you have a slinger. So this may again perhaps illustrate the connection between training for warfare and competitive athletics in the Greek world. But we do know from various sources that Aspendos was very well known for its wrestlers, and so these are featured prominently on their coins, and of course also have that connection with civic pride. I'm going to start moving into talking more about Roman representations now, but I'll start with Roman provincial coins, and I'll show you a couple of examples from Athens because, one of the interesting things, if we think about a subject like sport and spectacle, is both the Greeks and the Romans portrayed these, portrayed images that related to sport and spectacle on their coins in different ways. And so now we have a Greek city now under Roman domination referring to local games. And I know this is not a well-preserved example, but one of the more common ways that sport and spectacle are alluded to on Roman provincial coins is by showing gaming tables. That is, tables that have the prizes associated with victory in some local festival with athletic competitions. So here you have, as you can partly read, part of the name of the city of Athens in Greek, and then on the table you have a crown, like would be given to a victor in an athletic competition. You have a bust of Athena, who is, of course, the goddess honored in the local Pan-Athenaic games. And then you have an owl next to her, which is, of course, the famous attribute of Athena. And then below the table, or in front of the table, you have this amphora. And certainly in archaic and classical times, one of the prizes that was awarded to victors in Pan-Athenaic games was the distinctive form of the Pan-Athenaic amphora. So you may see these at the Met, for example, if you've visited the collection of Greek painted pottery. These are very large painted amphorae that had on one side the archaic cult statue of Athena, and then on the other side a depiction of some games like wrestling or running or whatever. And these were awarded to the athletes and contained the victorious athletes and contained olive oil from the sacred grove of Athena. I'll show you another provincial coin from Athens, and it's not the one I would ideally show you, but we don't have one of those, or if we do, it might be on display at the Met. We didn't have one here that I could pull for you. But as you may know, Depictions of buildings on Greek coins are not all that common. It's really the Romans that make the phenomenon of representing the built environment a thing. But on Roman provincial coins, like this one from Athens, these Greek cities do start depicting buildings like they did back at Rome. And so this is a view of the Acropolis in Athens, and there's your steps and the propylaea, the formal entryway. You see temples at the top of the Acropolis. There's the statue of Athena at the top of the Acropolis. And then you can see some of the rocks of the Acropolis in Athens. And this little kind of arch here is the sanctuary of Pan. Some other variants of this actually have the theater of Dionysus represented here. And as I say, I didn't have one of those I could show you, but they do exist. And I think that's interesting because, of course, that's an important entertainment venue associated with the cult of Athena here that appears on some coins. There are some other Greek coins, I think it's Heraclea and Bithynia, that show entertainment buildings. There you have the stadium for the foot race represented, but we don't have one of those in the collection I can show you. Otherwise, entertainment buildings on Roman provincial coins are not all that common. Let's see here, I'm skipping ahead of myself a little bit. I want to show you this coin. We're now moving to the Roman Republic. So I should look at my notes. This is what happens as I start talking and I get away from my notes and I forget to tell you things. So Roman Republican coins, when they refer to sport and spectacle, they've often been interpreted as kind of promises for games if and when the moneyer was elected to the position of aedile, because you may remember that moneyers in the Roman Republic were these young aristocratic men, probably in their early 20s, and the office of moneyeur is one of the entry-level positions into the cursus honorum. So you begin your political career kind of as a moneyeur, and then you move on to something like aedile and so on and so forth. And the ultimate aim at some point in your life is to become consul. So some scholars have interpreted a design like this, which has your typical chariot in the background, as you often have on these Roman Republican coins of the late 2nd century. But below that, you see a man with a spear spearing some kind of wild cat, like a leopard or something, that is almost jumping onto the spear, it looks like. So this may be kind of a reference that if and when this moneyeur is elected to the office of aedile, he will hold games. You seem to have this reference to the office of aedile on the obverse as well, because behind the head of Roma, you have this stalk of grain, and this is the other obligation of the aediles. Not only do they organize public games, but they also watch out for the grain supply and are responsible for the grain supply. So games and grain effectively are what they were responsible for. Another moneyeur from the Republic that's interesting to talk about as far as representations or references to games is concerned is Marcus Vulteius, round about 78 BC, who strikes 5 different coin types that refer to games. And so I'll show you these one by one. So the first has a head of Jupiter on one side, and then the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the Capitoline temple in Rome. And we know this refers to the Ludi Romani, the Roman games, in the context of all the other coins he struck that refer to different games and festivals. So that one, the Ludi Romani, and then we have this one that has Hercules on the obverse, who you recognize with lion skin. And then on the reverse, we have the boar. And so this refers to the Ludi Plebi, the plebeian games. Then we have a denarius with Liber. And then on the reverse, we have Ceres driving this biga of snakes, a chariot led by snakes, which refers to the Ludi Cereales associated with Ceres. Then we have this coin with a figure on the obverse, perhaps Attis. Others have described that figure in different ways. But the reverse shows Cybele driving a biga pulled by lions. And that refers to the Ludi Megalensis. And then we have finally this denarius by the same moneyer, struck the same year as all of these other coins, with Apollo on the obverse. And then on the reverse, this tripod, which has these letters SCDT from around it, which Crawford has interpreted as a Latin phrase referring to the popular contribution to fund these particular games, the Ludi Apollinares, the games of Apollo. So effectively what we are seeing on this moneyer's coins is a celebration of all the major Roman festivals for which the curule aediles and the plebeian aediles are responsible for. So in that way, not terribly dissimilar to what we see on that reference of the other coin I showed you right before this, where again, the responsibility of the aediles for hosting festivals is referred to. This was the cover coin for the long table advertisement, this denarius from 42 BCE by the moneyer Lucius Lavinius Regulus. The obverse of the coin shows a portrait of a man, presumably the moneyer's father, who we think is has the same name, Lucius Lavinius Regulus, who was probably the praetor and the friend of Cicero that Cicero writes about. The reverse is probably referring to a set of games that were held by the moneyer's father, perhaps associated with games in honor or memory of Julius Caesar, since this was struck in 42 BC and shortly there, or right around 42 BCE. And here again, you can see a trained hunter fighting a lion, and then we have a panther or something in the background fighting another trained hunter. And then we have either this has been interpreted in a few different ways. Some say a bear, some say a boar. I think the better examples look more like a bear that was wounded in the amphitheater or in the circus where these kinds of games could be held. Other types of games we see on Roman coins in the Republic are desultores in Latin. What a desultor is, and this is a coin from about 112, 111 BC by Tiberius Quinctius, which shows a man riding on a horse next to another horse. And they effectively were almost like gymnasts or acrobats who would jump from galloping horse to galloping horse. And this was one of the types of entertainments that was often offered in the Circus Maximus in the city of Rome. And they're described in various types of games in ancient Roman sources, and also described in the Perilia, the games that were held in Caesar's memory after he died, and Cassius Dio writes particularly about that set of games. Here's a coin of Publius Cipulius Macer from 44 BC. So this was shortly after Caesar died. And you see again a desultor, a man riding a horse next to another horse. So again, a figure that would jump back and forth while these horses are at gallop. And since these are struck in the months after Caesar is killed, presumably this is a reference to the funerary games of Julius Caesar that, as I mentioned, were described by Cassius Dio. Also related to Julius Caesar's death and games is this denarius of the young Octavian. So this also comes from 42 BC, and you have the portrait of Octavian on the obverse, who's the adopted son of Julius Caesar and the future Emperor Augustus. And you usually see that little patch of hair under his ear, which is meant to show his youth. I think he was 19 at the time he was adopted by Caesar at the time of Caesar's death, so he would be like 21 or something around the time this is struck. So this shows his youth. And then on the reverse, you have a curule chair, which is a magistrate's chair, something like what the Roman consul would sit in. But instead of a figure in this chair, you see a laurel crown. And then the chair is inscribed Caesar Dictator Perpetuo. So that is Caesar Perpetual Dictator, or Caesar Dictator for Life, which is the title he held when he was assassinated. And we know from texts that after Caesar died, the Senate voted to honor him with a chariot that was pulled in games in the circus to bring in his image to watch the games like a god. And also, like the gods, had a chair that would sit in the orchestra to watch productions in the theaters as well. So this refers to Caesar's chair, which was set up in the orchestra of the theaters in Rome during productions alongside the chairs for the gods, and his golden crown, which was placed on those chairs. And of course, that has a lot to do also with the legitimacy of Octavian, since he was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. Related to this theme of chairs, you may have heard me talk about this interesting series before. From about 120 years later, from the reign of the Emperor Titus. And these are contemporary with the inaugural games of the Colosseum in Rome. So I didn't pull one of the Colosseum coins to talk about because our good ones at the Met, and I've talked about them way too many times anyway. But at the same time those coins were struck, you also have these silver coins, which shows various chairs and thrones with different things sitting on them. And these have been interpreted in very different ways over the last 100 years. Some of the earliest interpretations were that these were the chairs and couches that supported images and attributes of the gods in theaters, like Caesar's chair that we just looked at. Others interpret these as pulvinaria, these platforms with images and attributes of the gods that were presumably set up around Rome after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius as appeals to the gods and their mercy after the tragedy of the destruction of Pompeii and Herculaneum and other areas around Vesuvius. But in an article from about, I think it's 1995 in the Swiss Numismatic Review, Ben Damsky wrote about these and more or less said, well, wait a minute, the biggest thing happening in Rome when this is struck is the 100 days of games in the Colosseum. These must be related to that. And I've built on Damsky's work, and he's 100% right. You know, that was what was going on. These have nothing to do with the eruption at Pompeii, because you don't celebrate negative events on coins, at least not on Roman coins. And there were also these viewing platforms where, which I've written about more extensively, where images and attributes of the gods were placed on chairs to watch games in the amphitheater as well. There was a special platform for that. So this refers to that religious impetus again behind the games, and even at the Colosseum. So here you see a draped throne with a thunderbolt on it. This refers to the presence of Jupiter at the games, the Colosseum. We have struck for Domitian as Caesar. We have one here with the Corinthian helmet representing Minerva, who was, of course, Domitian's favorite goddess. Then we have these things, which show, get them both in there. Yeah. So here again, you have draped couches with what looks like a semicircular canopy on one and a triangular canopy on the other. One of the types of coins I'm not showing you, but was struck throughout the Julio-Claudian period, were these carts that were pulled into the circus that would carry images or attributes of various emperors or empresses after they died, because they were honored with this presence to watch games in the circus. But the carts of those for women of the imperial house always kind of have this semicircular canopy at the top of those carts. And for the masculine members of the house, like the deified emperors, you always have this triangular kind of canopy on them with stars. And so these actually resemble exactly the canopies on those carts. And so what we think we have here is a representation of something called a strupus, which is an archaic form of a cult image. So rather than a figural representation of a cult image, you would get sticks and vines and things like that, which would symbolize the goddess. And so presumably these two different forms seem to represent masculine and feminine deities, so thereby representing the deified emperors and empresses and members of the imperial household at the games in the Colosseum. And just like Julius Caesar's chair in the theaters, we also have a curule chair, a magistrate's chair, also with a crown on top of it. And so this has been interpreted as representing the presence of the living emperor at the games, who also kind of had a semi-divine aura about him, whether he was physically present at the games or not. And even though this practice of placing chairs with images and attributes of the gods is not explicitly referred to in ancient texts, it is implicitly referred to by Cassius Dio, who talks about Commodus going to the Colosseum to see games, and in front of him a chair being, or not a chair, but the attributes of Hercules being carried, because he styled himself as the reincarnation of Hercules, and those then being placed on a chair on a special platform in the Colosseum, whether Commodus was there or not. So this refers to what is probably the more common practice of having a crown represent the emperor. Games at the inaugural games in Rome are also referred to more explicitly by the presence of elephants on gold and silver coins of Titus, again struck at the same time as the 100 Days of Games and the dedication of the Colosseum. If you read the primary sources like Marshall, you have clear descriptions of elephants participating in these games, fighting other animals like bulls, but also performing tricks. And one of the tricks the elephants perform is kneeling in front of the emperor's box as if they spontaneously recognize that the emperor is a divine figure. So these are the kinds of ideas that people would have had in mind when they saw these images on Titus's coinage. And as you can tell, much of Titus's coinage dealt with the 100 Days of Games. Later on in Roman history, you have elephants again appear on coins from time to time to refer to the games. So this is a coin of Antoninus Pius in the 2nd century, and you have this elephant, and then the accompanying legend Munificentia, munificence, referring to this generosity in providing provision for spectacles and games. And I also want to show you this quadrons of the Emperor Domitian with a rhinoceros on it. And this was struck around 83, 84, something like that. So a few years after Titus had died and after the inaugural games. And the reason the rhinoceros is featured is because this is an animal that very, very rarely participates in games in the city of Rome throughout Roman history, because they come from Africa, they're very difficult to catch, they're very ferocious, they're hard to train and keep alive in captivity. So these animals, when they are exhibited in Rome, are never really killed. I think there's only 4 instances of rhinoceroses ever appearing in games in the city of Rome. And so, you know, this really represents the expense and the lavishness of the games when a rhinoceros is able to appear. And this particular coin has engendered some debate about the Book of Spectacles by Marshall, which had been long interpreted as an eyewitness account of the 100 Days of Games. But when Marshall writes these poems describing the 100 Days of Games in the Colosseum, he's only addressing the emperor as Caesar, so we don't know really if he's talking about Titus or Domitian. And there are some things in the text that make scholars think maybe this is not Titus, but Domitian. And a rhinoceros appears several times in these. And so, in fact, Ted Buttrey wrote an article about these coins some years ago and argued that the fact that these coins exist and date from 83, 84 instead of the inaugural games is some hard evidence that Marshall's poems do not relate to the 100 Days of Games, but from games early in the reign of the Emperor Domitian. Of course, the other possibility is the rhinoceros stayed around for a few years and participated in games both in the initial games in Rome and then early in the reign of Domitian. From time to time, you also have references to the Ludi Seculares, the secular games as they are called, which doesn't have anything to do with the modern connotation of the word secular, but secular referred to an age, a saeculum. And an age in the Roman world was about 110 years. And so there were the secular games held roughly every 110 years, although there were different calendars and competing schedules. But these are celebrated on the coins of Augustus and Domitian and some later emperors as well. And so this is a coin of Domitian, which shows Domitian performing a bloodless sacrifice in front of a nondescript temple. And you can see the legend Ludi Seculares in this more kind of generic representation referring to the ritual aspect of the secular games is the most common type. There are several other types he struck referring to the circular games, and I only pulled this one example. But here you have a figure on a platform distributing the suffamenta, which was the fuel in the ritual fires that were lit during the circular games. And you see that SUF here referring to suffamenta, and in the background, a temple. You all know I like buildings on coins, so I had to show you one. And since I couldn't do the Colosseum or wouldn't do the Colosseum again, I wanted to bring out this sestertius of the Emperor Trajan, which we can date to 103, which shows the Circus Maximus from the perspective of the Palatine Hill. So on the right-hand side, this would be the area of the starting gates. And then, this is a little hard to see, but you have the back row of seating here, the Temple of Sol and Luna, which was built into the seats. And then it's a little hard to see in this example, but you have the bend of the circus here that comes around. You have the Arch of Titus built into the circus. And then you have the facade wall of the circus here. And also, see if I can bend it a little bit, if that gives any more contrast. You've got the barrier of the Circus Maximus with the various monuments and the turning posts on either ends. And then this large Egyptian obelisk in the center of the barrier, which Augustus had brought to Rome from Egypt after the Battle of Actium. The occasion for the striking of this panoramic image of the circus is the reconstruction of the circus by Trajan. So there was a fire in the reign of Domitian, and so Trajan had to rebuild the seats in the Circus Maximus and memorialize that with the coins. Just to contrast that image, here's a later representation of the same building, the Circus Maximus, on coins of the Emperor Caracalla. And it shares a lot of similarity with the representation I showed you before. Your starting gates on this side, monuments, seating and monuments across the back. Yeah, there you go. You can see again the Temple of Sol and Luna built into the seating, the bend of the circus at the top left, the Arch of Titus in the front, and then you have the barrier of the Circus Maximus again with the two metae, the turning posts, and the large obelisk in the center. The difference with Trajan's coins, from Trajan's coins, is that these coins of Caracalla really emphasize the starting gates, because this coin also celebrated reconstruction work, and Caracalla's reconstruction work focused on rebuilding the starting gates. And so it makes sense that that's what's really emphasized on this coin. And then we also have, back to Trajan, struck at the same time as the Circus Maximus coin, you see Trajan, the emperor, standing on a platform here with a crowd of people gesturing towards him. And behind them, you see the meta. So this is the turning post in the circus, on the track of the circus. And then a personification of the circus with a wheel next to the figure. And so this tells us that Trajan is standing in the circus giving a speech to a crowd of people. So this may relate to a ceremony for the rededication of the circus or something like that after Trajan's reconstruction of it. And then picking up or continuing the theme of the Circus Maximus in Rome, this has got to be one of my favorite examples dealing with sport and spectacle on Roman coins. You have this coin, which at first glance looks like a representation of a ship. But then when you start to look more closely, you see animals running around, you see chariots. And if you look more closely at the ship, you see turning posts like the barriers in the Circus Maximus and other monuments. What this is a representation of a spectacle that is also described to us by the historian Cassius Dio, who would have been an eyewitness to these games. And for these games, what the Emperor Septimius Severus did is they had the barrier of the Circus Maximus, so on the track, decked out to look like a giant ship. And the obelisk was turned into a mast. So this is actually the obelisk of the barrier of the Circus Maximus with a sail on it. And at a certain point, a signal was given and the ship broke apart and all of these animals jumped out and there was a hunt, one of these killings of all of these animals that jumped out of this ship. And then after this hunt, it was followed by chariot races, as would normally be the case in the circus, and you see the chariots up here. And then you have this inscription. I know it's hard to read on this example, but it's Laetitia Temporum, the lightness, the happiness of times, which also echoes a monumental inscription memorializing these games, which also uses this phrase, Laetitia Temporum. I could talk about any number of other examples, but we don't have 6 hours or anything, and I didn't want to get into the question of contorniates or anything else. But I also wanted to highlight this really amazing and really rare coin that we have in our collection, which is an aureus of the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, showing the Stadium of Domitian. I think there's only 4 or 5 of these known in existence. This one was donated to the ANS probably 30 years or so ago by Ben Lee Damsky, and it's one of the better examples. Scholarship had often referred to this as the Circus Maximus, but it doesn't have an obelisk or anything like that, so we know it's not the circus. And if you look closely here, you can tell it's a Greek stadium that Domitian had built for Greek-style athletics, because when you look closely at the figures here on the arena floor, you see wrestlers, for example, and runners. And these are the kinds of sports in the Greek fashion that would be held in a stadium rather than a Roman-style building like an amphitheater where you'd have gladiators and hunts, or like a circus where you would have chariot racing and hunts. This figure on the far right with a canopy over him is probably the emperor watching the games. Then we can see the facade of the Stadium of Domitian with these arched entrances and then these arcades containing statues above, just like you have in the Circus Maximus and in the Colosseum as well. So we're not exactly sure what set of games or what event led to the striking of these coins, but it is the only ancient representation of the Stadium of Domitian that survives. And I think it's just a really amazing thing that we have this here at the ANS. So anyway, that's a little overview of sport and spectacle on Greek and Roman coins, and happy to answer any questions or talk about anything else or put anything back up on the screen if you like. So thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Certainly, as Nathan said, he's welcome to take any questions if anybody has any. Anyone?
Nathan, I have a question. The alien coins of the early Olympics showing flying eagles, which I think might have been used as models for American flying eagle coinage. Did you show any of those?
I did not show them. The one I have is a standing eagle. I'll put it back up. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, I'm sure we have these in the collection. We had a couple of trays of Elis, but no, I didn't show that one.
Thank you.
One interesting thing is in Croton, you have similar designs with this eagle standing on an ionic column. And some scholars have interpreted that as a clear allusion to the coins of Elis and Olympia, because the Croton athletes often won victories in the Olympics, and so that might be an allusion to their own victories. But I didn't pull any of these coins of Croton.